Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of Building Life Science Adventures. I hope if you were able to join some of the sessions yesterday, you enjoyed them. This morning's session is on the topic of how will AI change life science careers, which is obviously a really exciting topic. I'm going to hand you over to Juergen shortly, who's going to introduce himself and our other panelists today. But just quickly before we get going, if you can keep your microphones on mute throughout the discussion, that would be great. There is a chat box at the bottom of the screen. If you want to post any questions or comments in there, that would be fantastic. And then finally, this session is being recorded. So that is it from me. I'm going to disappear and hand you over to Juergen, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, and welcome everyone to today's second day of One Nucleus. It's a great conference so far. I'm very pleased to be your moderator here for this new session on how will AI change life science careers and building life science adventures. I'm very pleased to be joined by our panelists, our esteemed panelists, who will all introduce themselves in a minute. I myself, just a few words, I'm the CEO of CCDC, the Cambridge Crystallographic Data Center in the middle of Cambridge. We are a global data repository serving tens of thousands of scientists around the world, and obviously working on a lot of scientific algorithms and many different methods, AI, deep learning, machine learning included. So it'll be a great pleasure to see today and debate and discuss how AI is sort of impacting the sector. Obviously, AI is impacting all sorts of domains around the world, but we're specifically focusing today on life sciences because that's all our experience here. So with that, I'd like to just have all the panelists introduce themselves, and then we will cover a few good questions and hopefully have a very good debate on how the future will shape up with AI. So over to you, Rowan.
Thank you, Juergen. Wonderful to be here today. I am a co-founder of Precision Life. We're a novel population analytics company using patented combinatorial analytics to understand disease biology at an unprecedented resolution. And I'm also a member, an independent member of Digital Health and Care Wales, which is essentially a non-executive role on one of the brand new NHS strategic health authorities in Wales. And we're charged with the digital transformation of health and care at pace in Wales. So that's a really nice link between finding and innovating in life sciences and actually seeing what it takes to put things actually in the clinic and benefit patients. I've worked with some of the leading talents over the last 30 years in the space who have all been trying to apply computational approaches to biopharma and on occasion in particle physics. Some of them are those are my fellow esteemed panelists this morning. So there's a lot of years around this panel, and maybe we will give you some benefits of that experience for what it's worth. Behind me in the graphic is the results, the image, we would call it a disease architecture of COVID analysis, which we did back in June 2020. And we were one of the first companies to find the 6 different mechanisms underpinning severe COVID and predict 29 either candidate chemicals or drugs on market that we thought would be effective against COVID. 13 of those are now in clinical trials. So it talks to some of the advantages that we can get using these tech tools and technologies that will really speed up the industry. And all of that we'll get to. I think it's just important today to reflect on the fact that we are part of a global industry. Precision Life has offices in the US. We're headquartered in Oxford, Denmark, and also in Poland, which you know is quite sobering in these times. So for all of us who have colleagues or collaborators in the Ukraine at the moment, we're thinking of them. So thank you, Juergen, for the opportunity to introduce myself.
Thank you, Rowan. Wonderful introduction. And yes, I will say from my own point of view, I think the current geopolitical situation is rather disconcerting. So I should think, I mean, for all of us, we were discussing what the future holds, but I should think peace is an absolute fundamental requirement for all nations. And as we're shaping up the industries with AI, I think it's us humans who should have peaceful control over these things and make sure all nations can thrive. So yeah, but this present week has been rather disconcerting, seeing what we're seeing here in Ukraine. So anyway, with that, I'd like to pass over to Sven to introduce himself as well, please.
Thank you very much, Juergen. Thanks everyone for being here. Yes, my name is Sven Sewitz. I'm the Director of Biodata Innovation at Eagle Genomics. So my connection to this area is that we at Eagle, our tagline is network microbiome science. So we're in the life science area, slightly different from the other panelists here, usually not in the drug area and that area, but in the food, nutrition, but also personal care and wellness area. That is our focus. We have, as Juergen said, we have even colleagues around the world, and I just also wanted to just commemorate briefly the plight of the people in Ukraine right now. We have 13 people there, and we're engaged on a daily basis with their well-being. The topic of today, of course, is as we know, AI in the future. So for us, AI is of course a really important integral part of our undertaking. And has many aspects. So at the one hand, we're aware of the enormous opportunities that AI brings to our business, but we're also aware of the hype surrounding it, of the dangers, and I think we'll touch on a couple of these topics as well. I think we're still at a very early stage in the maturity cycle of this technology. We need to be aware of our own biases when we deal with this technology, and I think it's a great opportunity to understand right at the beginning of where this journey is going. So I'm very, very happy that we have a conversation right now before it's too late. As we were also mentioning, the biggest goal is that we live peacefully and happily together and in a better future. I think that's the overreaching goal, and I think we're all contributing towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sven. Yeah, I must say, I'm not quite clear where we are by now with the Gartner cycle on AI. I mean, where are we with either the hype or, I mean, there's also a trough of disillusionment arguably coming. So maybe I don't know whether we're half past that and we're back up there towards much more maturity for AI methods, but I'm sure we'll be discussing all of that today as well. So over to Rob Scoffin to introduce himself, please.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be on the panel. I would echo the sentiments of the other panelists and thoughts with the people of Ukraine who are suffering terribly, being physically attacked at the moment. So it sort of puts into perspective, other topics of conversation, but we're here to talk about artificial intelligence. So I'm a CEO of Cresset. I've worked here for 12 years, but as Rowan alluded to, I'm slightly long in the tooth. So I've been doing this for 30 years, man and boy in the cheminformatics, computational chemistry industry. And I've been dealing with what may loosely be termed artificial intelligence probably since the beginning of that time. So I recall working on what artificial neural network technology back in the early 90s. And so I've seen, a long evolution. So I would say, to Juergen's comment, I think we're probably beyond the trough of disillusionment and actually into the era of finding real world applications that make sense. So probably in that kind of the upslope of adoption, I would suggest. But as a scientist, all scientists I think carry this sort of twin demons on their shoulders of being massive enthusiasts for science and technology and at the same time being massively cynical about things, which is appropriate. You've got to sort of question. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the opinion around the panel of the ways in which AI can be applied and how that sort of impacts careers and people's lives as workers within the industry and also the recipients of the advances that AI can enable. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much, Rob. So we're going to cover a few questions. So I'd like to start with the first. I just want to say to the audience, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box. I'll see if I can take them along the way as we go for the next 45 minutes. But the first question I want to put to all our esteemed panelists here is, what do we believe AI can bring to the future of life sciences? And what is the impact on the nature of jobs over time? Over to Rowan.
Thank you, Juergen. I'll begin this by saying something quite bold, which is, and having known Rob since the time when he had hair, I think you pulled most of it out in those early times of working with neural networks, Rob. You know, AI is going to deliver the data promises that we've been making in life sciences for years. So, you know, we made very bold claims around, you know, what would be the return on the Human Genome Project. You know, big claims for large-scale proteomics, and yet really we haven't seen that abundance of data transform the efficiency of drug discovery yet. And you know, I would suggest that's because we don't have the analytical methods that that we need to understand biology, which is intrinsically non-linear, right? We know that biology functions through networks with feedback loops with multiple control levels, but many of our analytical tools are based on pairwise comparisons and standard stats. You know, we're really excited at Precision Life. You know, our novel approach is showing some a path, I think, through beginning to get on top of some of those challenges and getting us deep into disease biology, and that's really powerful. So, you know, if anyone wants to go and read the papers on medRxiv around COVID, you get a sense of, if you can apply the right analytics to the abundant data sets that we have at our disposal, we can get real actionable information that we can plan and advance our drug discovery efforts on. And for me, that means that AI is a pathway to a much more successful and efficient life science industry that can identify and mitigate risk much earlier in the process. So if you think about drug development processes, you know, being able to identify novel targets much earlier, really quite exciting. We haven't, you know, really seen a lot of new drug targets come out of initiatives like the Human Genome, perhaps except in cancer and a better understanding of rare disease. To be able to stratify patients. I mean, one of my frustrations is, you know, for drug discovery, we've spoken so long about cellular models, and yet when we get into the clinical settings, we deal with patients and they're not neat, and they come with multiple diseases and different paths that have led them to these chronic disease states. So being able to actually understand, you know, what type of disease that's in that a patient is presenting with, and drug that. And if you can understand who are the likely responder populations in clinical trials, you'll be able to run shorter, more efficient trials. And you'll know when you launch new medicines who are the target patients that can benefit from that, which will eliminate waste from healthcare. And if we do have that, if we can get to that level of understanding of the patient and the disease model, we can run healthcare systems where decisions are made, prudent healthcare decisions are made in the light of evidence. So that's a really kind of exciting upside, and we need some of that in the current climate. You know, so I would say a path to more treatment options for unmet clinical needs and better patient outcomes is what we're here to invest in and work on.
Yeah,
and so,
thank you, Rowan. I think it's great. I mean, just you mentioned even better decision making, which I think is absolutely key as well for the coming years, because a lot of these things are based on us understanding the vast data that is now in any domain, whether it's chemistry, biology. I mean, biology, genomics, that's all huge data, but even chemistry's got big data. So these AI methods in the coming years will help us to understand the patterns and the interconnections much more. I mean, from my point of view, when I look at all the work that happened on COVID for the last couple of years, that was a hugely international, interdisciplinary effort at warp speed, which many different disciplines had come into, and they were all using their various new methods and arguably AI and algorithms to do things much faster. Because traditionally, what would have taken 10 years for a vaccine, I mean, we all know what happened. It was way faster. So that was nice to see and actually necessary for the planet, quite frankly. So, but with that, I'd like to pass to Sven to also try and put more color to that question as to what else AI will bring for life sciences, and perhaps look at the element also how the jobs might be impacted. Over to you, Sven.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think these are really great comments, everyone, and Juergen. If just speaking out of my own personal, area of expertise and where we come from. So first of all, I am a molecular biologist by background and a microbiologist, and I was just thinking about the opportunities that we now have in front of us, and how did that happen 40, 50 years ago when we were beginning to start on genomic engineering, transforming bacteria, understanding how to manipulate life science processes for our benefit. And I was struck by the fact that in 1975 there was a conference in Asilomar led by the scientists to understand the opportunities and the threats. And it was a really groundbreaking conference by the scientific community to set out guidelines, and that they were actually then taken into research. So if anyone has ever been to a cell lab, they will know there's a classification. It's either an S1, S2, S3 classification, which basically stemmed from the ideas that were raised in 1975. Understanding the area in which we were operating to classify what we're actually doing. And I think this is something we are jumping on this technology, and it's great to see the outcomes. And I fully agree, biology is inherently nonlinear, and we struggle with that. We on a daily basis, our clients struggle with that on a daily basis. And that's, of course, our business opportunity that we're helping them. But the other problem is we're dealing with cases which are not even a diseased case. So in a disease case, if you think about the data, you have a disease case, which is clearly a non-equilibrium case that is quite differential from the healthy case. If you're talking about nutrition, if you're talking about chronic illnesses that go over a lifetime, which are also a scourge of our society, the signals itself are much weaker. So the whole data estate you need a lot more data even to understand what you're dealing with than in a strong disease case, because the signal is probably much weaker. So I think we are going to be dependent on these mechanisms. I don't think we can come around it. At the same time, we have to be aware that who are the people making the decisions based on what type of information, so that are we still in control of this? There's a promise of a white box, and I'm very skeptical. If anyone who's ever written code, will know that this is probably a myth or an aspiration too far. I think it's a really important conversation to have, is what are we actually getting ourselves into? And that's why this is also a call for the future generations. And I think so anyone who's entering this area now, for the young people in the audience, or for someone who's thinking about this, so back to the topic of careers, I think it is going to be incredibly important to be aware of the biases and the areas of non-knowledge. And especially it was very funny. I was talking to our daughter a couple of days ago, just in preparation for this panel. We have a good conversation around the breakfast table, literally. And she told me, she's 14, who loves maths and does not code, but she immediately told me, oh, there's all these cases, and I looked into this too, where people were given treatments based on their postcode, or there were other inherent biases which only came out after a couple of months, so that people of color, for example, were disadvantaged in certain treatments. And so we have to be very careful in the biases that maybe the training data sets have, or that we impute into some of these things. And maybe one of the biggest short-term advantages, but now I know I'm talking short-term, Rob is saying this is he's right, of course, it does have a long history, but in the eye of society, it might have been short-term, that we are aware of the biases that we are imputing and inputting into our models, and they will be surfaced, hopefully. And I think this process has to also be made aware, and we have to accelerate.
Thank you, Sven. That's such an important point about these sort of currently inherent biases of AI methods. I mean, if we're dealing here with systems that have to make clinical decisions and healthcare decisions and sort of management decisions of, chronic diseases and ultimately how to cure diseases or help the patient, we're thinking patient centricity and the health and well-being of every human, and those types of systems that we're designing and building over the coming years, I mean, they oughtn't be not understood with black box technologies and then maybe having inherent biases. That's just not good enough. And you raise a number of good points there when the wrong populations are perhaps treated with the wrong things because the models underneath might not have been properly statistically aligned, shall we say. So I think, I often reflect on the concept of data trust and validated algorithms and white boxes as well, rather than black boxes. So I think algorithms need to be understood. They need to be tested, they need to be validated, they need to be peer reviewed by the community, by the scientific community. I think these are very, very important principles. And I have to say, if we can teach this early on to the new generation of scientists to really get it across how trust is absolutely fundamental here for us humans to stay properly in kind of control and know what these new systems are doing, then I think that's quite essential. So I would say future jobs, there's a bit of an impact there in terms of teaching the ethics side of things as well. But with that, I want to hear from Rob Scoffin on this question as well before we go to the second question. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Juergen. Really interesting sort of listening to Rowan and Sven's perspective. And one thing that Rowan was sort of talking about, and I had a conversation just last week with a friend who works in the healthcare sector on disease treatment pathways, particularly in oncology, where they're linking together the results coming from multiple inputs. So human inputs, go and see the clinician and the clinician looks at your symptoms, but also then having a CT scan or an X-ray, or increasingly these days, obviously a tumor biopsy and a sequencing of the tumor tissues. And one of the things that we were talking about is kind of the universality of AI in that space as not being a sort of an interesting thing to have, but actually a critical element that in fact sort of ties everything together and makes it possible to use these multiple inputs. And the example he gave was in one particular, I think he was in breast cancer treatment, they have adopted a standardized pathways of care from one particular cancer center in the US. So this is like, one of 70 major cancer centers in the US have provided treatment pathways. And last year they published 70 new treatment pathways in breast cancer alone. And so for any clinician to be able to look at the totality of that data on their own is impossible. They can't sort of process that information. And then to say, what's the best treatment pathway? What's the best outcome going to be for this particular patient based on all of that multivariate input without the AI sitting on their shoulder and saying, well, have you thought about this and have you thought about this? And by the way, this new protocol was published 2 weeks ago. So I think, there's a sort of universality to the methods that essentially means, I think, within that sort of healthcare context, everybody is going to have to learn how to get along with AI. So, you've got to be able to kind of deal with it as a tool. And in my specific domain, so within the kind of chemistry research, sort of taking it all the way kind of up the other end, which is where I've spent the last 30 years. The thing that, is I think most interesting about the AI methods in that space is they're very rapidly being adopted as just another really great tool. So they're a really great specific tool for helping you to deal again with these large scale multivariate problems. But at that end, the interpretability becomes interesting as much as the answer. So in that sort of cancer care pathway, in a way, you sort of don't really mind how the AI got to the the suggestion that, you know, this treatment protocol is the best treatment protocol, and I've got evidence for that. But in the sort of chemistry discovery space, you actually want to know, you know, so why does the model think that this molecule rather than that molecule is the best idea? And, you know, that's what Rowan said, I pulled all my hair out, you know, just about working with neural networks in the early 90s. One of the hardest things was to try and build a way to interpret the models that were coming out so that you could actually take action. And so I think the change in how in careers and how people need to sort of work with these systems is going to be obviously very context dependent. But I think there's going to be sort of two big challenges. One is just getting over the fear of using the black box. And so in some circumstances, black box is absolutely the right idea. And then the other is understanding the technology enough that you can treat it as a white box in some way. And there are mechanisms by which you can investigate and sort of probe the model. And to get into that then understanding and trying to use that as a prospective tool to be able to say, well, you know, I'm going to go this way rather than that way in terms of my in the sort of chemistry synthesis world, in the medicinal chemistry world. You know, oftentimes it's an either or decision you need to make. Do I go A or B? But understanding what the model is telling you is quite critical to that. So, you know, there's these competing factors, I think, and it means that there's a depth of understanding of AI that's going to be required across the board. I think across all the sort of technical and scientific disciplines. It's probably not in the educational system at the moment.
Yeah, no, you raise a very important point here, Rob. I think this was a line from you which I liked in previous chats we've had. I think you said a scientist in the future, an AI-enabled scientist in the future is better than a scientist that isn't enabled by AI, which really means there is a certain symbiosis, I would like to posit, between humans and AI or these new methods. And we just need to know what they're doing, what they're good for, and they process a lot of data, find new patterns, find new things. But I do think that the experts still need to sit on top and then make the final decisions on certain things and interpret perhaps the insights that have been generated by the vast data processing that the algorithms have done. So there is an argument for a real sort of symbiosis that needs to happen. And I think that needs to be trained, and people need to be educated on those sort of things as to what they can and can't trust and how they should operate in the future.
Can I make one follow-on point? Sorry, if it's okay,
please,
because it's a great conversation. I think Rowan, you both said something, and Rob, that really struck my chord, which is the context. Now, we can never control for the absolute every context, and we have this conversation as well. You know, in the microbiome space, when I was giving a short internal lecture, I just calculated purely mathematically what are the number of different combinations of interactions between bacteria. We know they interact, and there's at least 1,000 different species of bacteria in our gut alone, and just the mathematical combination of those interactions is more than there are atoms in the universe, literally by orders of magnitude. So we will never be able to account for all that complexity and the context. So I think what you're saying, Juergen, is really critical. We have to understand the system, but we have to know that it's only a subset of all possible contexts and situations that we will never be able to fully grasp, which is then again where our human intuition at the weird point comes in. Now, there's not one final point. I think what I also heard once was saying that this hard decision making is going to be taken over by algorithms, which means some maybe not. Okay, great, but I think it gives an even bigger weight on our surrounding knowledge rather than the strictly factual knowledge. But maybe that's a point for conversation.
So I'm just going to respond and just reflect. So we've talked a lot about black boxes and white boxes and limitations. You know, part of those. So there's an absolute truth that we have to be aware of what data we're putting into these systems, you know, and there are practices that are sort of standard practices at the moment where, because we operate them, imputation would be a fantastic example, we immediately introduce bias into our data. And you know, I'm a fan of getting rid of imputation. We never use it in Precision Life, because you start by messing up the signal that is in all that investment you made in collecting the data. And I think that some of the challenges come down to the narrowness of our mathematical techniques. So, with Precision Life, we spun out a company called Genomics to use the platform in food production, and so they've been doing a lot of work on the microbiome of ruminant animals, in part to reduce methane with the use of sustainability, and they're able to consider those very large levels of interactions. Last time I counted, I think it's 10 to the 65 atoms in the universe, there or thereabouts. And we're certainly sort of being able to deal with those level of complexity, but not in a classical statistical method, by looking at things in combination. And that, I think, is important. The second thing I would say is, black box models, it's all about how you generate the model. So if your model isn't explainable and provably logically true, then it's a black box, right? So I would be saying, then we need techniques and approaches that allow us to build explainable models that we then run our algorithms and clinical decision support over. And we have choice, we have agency in how we architect these solutions. So, for me, this definition of what AI is possibly much more broader than the sort of, we're all going to kind of be enslaved by black box statistical systems. We can choose what we do there.
Well, look, let's broaden out a bit. That's fine then. That's good, Rowan. Thank you very much. I want to look at a couple of questions that have come into the chat box and then move us on to the second question. Oh, by the way, Rowan, I like the fact you counted 10 to the 65th atoms in the universe. That might have taken you a while. So the question here, there was one from Catherine Simpson. How do you see the skill sets needed to maximize the opportunity that AI brings changing in the future? And there was a related question, which is, what skills should life science students learn at university to enhance their careers? I'd just like to roll both these questions into my second question, because I think they're all related. So the question that we're now discussing for the next 10 minutes is, how do companies and organizations go after securing talent, the talent with all the necessary skill sets needed, whether they're present already or whether they need to be built up gradually over time? So let's discuss, how do companies and organizations go after talent, and how can we build the right skill sets and find the right skill sets globally, presumably. So over to you, Rob, as a first, we get to hear your view on this point.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to think about it, because none of this sort of is meaningful unless you can actually do something about it. And I think the skill set, sort of to maximize the opportunity, I think, as I alluded to, there's the context, and Sven sort of echoed that, the context is all. And so it is going to depend on the specifics of whereabouts in the academia or industry, your career takes you. But I think the one thing that I would look at as a weakness from my, narrow perspective of being a computational chemist is a lack of understanding of the basic statistics. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding sometimes that coming through the sort of the educational system that I see candidates coming through, where they've and I think this may be a sort of a UK problem. People have specialized very, very early on. My kids are at an age where they're having to choose what subjects they're going to do at A level. And you can do sciences or you can do arts. And if you want to do, 3 science subjects and an art subject, people raise their eyebrows and say you can't get that, doesn't fit in the timetable. And then it gets worse when you go to university. So you want to be a chemist, and then suddenly, that's it, right? You're not studying physics or biology or maths to a great extent. And so I think there's a challenge there for the educational system, particularly in this country, to broaden out and keep relevant the other skills. So if you're training engineers still need to understand biology, and they still need to understand, clearly they're going to be mathematically skilled. But the inverse is true as well. If biologists need to understand, sufficient mathematics, that they're not phased or sort of put off by the complexity that could be involved in the sort of artificial intelligence, and make the mistake of saying, well, it's a black box and I'll never understand it, because that way leads to just ignoring, as Rowan said, ignoring a lot of the issues of what data did I put in, and how did I actually bias the training of the AI in order to give me back the result that I was expecting, versus actually telling me what the data is telling me. So I think there's that sort of educational challenge, and I guess the corollary in terms of how we access the talent is, from a company perspective, we're investing significantly in training internally and externally. So we're engaged in a number of collaborations around the world with academics, both in terms of that being a conduit to bring people into a commercial career from an academic starting point, but also as a way for us to be able to second staff out to then sort of work at the cutting edge of other scientific disciplines. Because for me, the hardest thing to find is somebody who does chemistry, biology, drug discovery, and stats and maths. That I just describe, a very, very, very small sort of overlap in the Venn diagram of people in the world. And those are the people I need to hire. And so, it's challenging to go find the ones that exist. It's extremely competitive, which I know you sort of mentioned in our previous discussions, Juergen, of, there's a kind of war for talent. And so we're taking the approach that, yes, we'll go out and hire where we can, but we're also providing internal training so that we upskill all of our existing staff. Might have 3 of those skills and they need upskilling in 2 of them, but over time I'll get them to the point that they need to be at.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. I'd like to bring Sven in. Any other views as to how we find the talent and build up the skills, or find the skills?
Yeah, I think what Rob mentioned is really, really crucial, to have a sort of, looking very hard for talent, advertising the fact that this is a really interesting space for us, as it is for us as well. One route we have taken is to hire interns, to offer internships, which we do on a regular basis. We have 3 to 5 interns at any given time within the company, which involves, shadowing us, shadowing the computational biologists, shadowing the data scientists, learning how to code. And I think increasingly this is one way where we're going to go, as we need to upskill internally. But we are also in constant contact with academic institutions. We have joint PhD scholarships, accepting them. We reach out to them. We want to know what is needed, and on the other hand, we also want to give them a view into the commercial world of what questions are relevant, and what skills can they bring to that table, what they need to invest in on their own. I think it's a really important conversation to be had, a discussion, because we have our own goals, but of course individuals bring their novelty and their engagement and their enthusiasm with them, and their own ideas. So I think the best thing what can happen, I think, are these panels as today, and more engagements, is where we just have a conversation around the table with other colleagues, to make sure people feel enthusiastic, because the future is amazing. I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate. I've worked in great universities. Still, the job that I'm doing now is probably one of the most sophisticated and just demanding jobs I've ever done, because the requirements are just so large. And that means also there's amazing opportunities for anyone entering this field, be it healthcare, or be it AI, or be it consumer health or nutrition. So it's going to be a mix of hard goals that we put also into the education system. I think I was reflecting on that as well. I mean, I was looking at the time. We're now at a stage where I think everyone who finishes school is literate and numerate. We've managed to do that over the past 200 years or something, or even longer. There's still a long way to go, for example, just as a personal example, it took me quite a while to understand that, distributions are actually crucial. Understanding distributions is not trivial. And the data that you see aren't just data points. They come from a distribution. And what's more, they come from a process that underlies that produces this distribution. So we have to go much further down into the mechanistics of what is actually producing the data to be able to understand it and make decisions on it. So I think we have quite a far way to go to actually be able to grapple that data and grapple the methodologies that are built on top of that data.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sven. I mean, I think, at the CCDC, one of our missions is to advance science. We obviously engage with the next generation to train or work with PhDs and postdocs to learn new methods and all. And I have to say, at the moment, there's more than 2/3 of all the projects are sort of on machine learning and deep learning and neural nets and other things. So that's really more and more everywhere in the universities. And I think we just have to make sure people are excited for the life sciences, because the war on global talent is obviously for all the other domains. So I guess everyone's after AI experts. And it's at that point, it's a small Venn diagram. You're right, Rob. So I'm thinking if we can attract people into the life sciences, because there's kind of a higher level mission or higher level purpose to advance science, which is quite a good thing for humanity. So I think that should be quite attractive to go in that area. And if we can just build up the skills. And now I want to make one other point. You mentioned art and science earlier, Rob. I do think art could bring more creativity into the sciences. So if we can find a way to combine art stronger into the sciences, we might get some creativity boosts, which can only help us to advance the scientific methods, which we'll need. But with that, I just want to move over to Rowan. She might have a few additional points on where do we find the talent and how do we build up the skills.
Yeah, I'm very uncomfortable using the expression war on talent in the current climate, or war for talent. And one of the most rewarding aspects of my career, I'm just about comfortable calling it a career now rather than a happy accident, is the incredibly talented people I've worked with. It's a joy every day. In some respects, how you go out and recruit is the same for almost any discipline, right? You start with culture. So to secure great talent, and that's what we're all looking for, you have to be worthy of your employees, right? So you start by recognizing that talented people have choice. And that means, having a vision that galvanizes really talented people to commit to investing their time in the pursuit of the company's mission and focusing on the values and making sure that everyone in the company lives those values. So that's kind of, absolutely the foundation to recognize culture will trump strategy every day of the week, and it's something you invest in. Because the talents that we're searching for are so rare, we have to recognize the entirety of the talent horizon. So time and again, business schools are telling us that diverse teams succeed in solving complex problems. That's diversity in all senses. So, educational backgrounds, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, all of it. So companies that build a talent strategy that encompasses that widest pool of talent, are best placed to secure good talent. And that's why I think, Sven and Juergen, talking about the arts contribution is really well made. I think helping people bridge between their disciplines, what Rob touched on, we train people very narrow and deep very early in their careers. And having worked with particle physicists who have been, at the front line generally, and mathematicians of working on some of these advanced techniques, schooling them in biology is just a joy, because you just watch these really smart minds start to think differently, and that's really rewarding. And I think the other bit for growing businesses like Precision Life is you have to recognize you can't be world class at everything. And so you might not be securing that talent through employing people. It might be through collaborating with world class organizations out there. So that's part of the success strategy. And then absolutely sort of be proactive. So what Sven was saying about working with universities and reaching into the talent pool, you know, it's yes doing that, but also doing it in a way that resonates with the you know, smart graduates and postgraduates that you're looking to recruit. So, you know, I have to recognize at my grand old wizened age that I haven't got a lot to say that resonates with young people who are starting out on their career, but we have fantastically talented people in our organization who do. So we kind of send those people out and searching out, you know, those initiatives within those universities that are trying to crack some of those problems that Rob's touched on. So I'd sort of call out Geraint Thomas's work at UCL. So they're starting a program called Learn to Discover. So Geraint is one of those mathematicians who's ended up in the life science department, and they're beginning to put together a program to train more mathematically literate biologists. So that's all kind of what we can do as recruiters. I think for those who are setting out and sort of, you know, what skills should students learn at university, I would say learn what is your passion, right? You're setting out on something that is going to be with you for the rest of your life. You know, I still remember that first picture of the DNA double helix I saw at 13, and that's been an adventure that is still with me today, like decades and decades onwards. Yeah. So start with what's your passion.
Thank you, Rowan. I'd like to move us on to the third question. Thank you. You raise a very important point on culture, by the way, and we've got a question here in the chat box as well, which I'd like to highlight. The question was, you know, is your employer brand and allied messaging on employee value proposition attracting the right specialist skills? That is a very important question to consider, because, you know, people have to have the right sort of values-based framework and a top culture and a great work environment. Otherwise, you're not going to manage to attract top skills and good people in that sort of diversity range that you also mentioned, Rowan, which I agree. I mean, it's in Amazon's, they call it, you know, the 2 pizza teams and the highly interdisciplinary teams with, you know, small folks getting together, doing all the thing, bringing the different skills from their diverse backgrounds. I think that's essential to be that agile in the future. But anyway, I'd like us to consider the final question in the last 12 minutes. And by the way, audience, please put more questions in the chat box if you like. The final question then is, what are some of the rate limiting steps for AI adoption in the life sciences? And conversely, what are the key enabling factors? So Rob, over to you.
Yeah, so I think Rowan actually just expressed it really well, that I think one of the key disabling factors is old fuddy-duddies like myself getting in the way of youthful talent that actually understands a lot more about how the technology can be applied in the problem space. And I sit there cynically saying, yeah, but, you know, I've heard that all before, you know, so I've been doing this for 30 years and, you know, so I think the key enabler, if I flip that round to the positive, I think the key enabler is for those in the budget holding decision-making nexus to really get and understand. So there's a whole kind of educational thing we touched on, and that's really critical. So you need that talent coming through, but you need the people who are doing the hiring and to understand the need and the necessity for getting that knowledge and that skill set and bringing that in and adopting. And so, you know, we're a biased panel. So, you know, I think all 4 of us kind of get it, understand it. We could probably get it and understand it more. That's almost certainly true. But I think the broader brush, and then when I translate that into into the customers that I deal with, technology adoption is very difficult in the sort of pharmaceutical discovery industry at times, and at other times it's crazily easy. So there's a sort of lemming like, you know, we're all going to do this because it's the answer, and it's, you know, it's never the answer. It hasn't been the answer all my time, you know, the last 30 years. There's never been one thing that's the answer. So I think there's a danger in sort of going, yeah, AI is the answer, but also there's a danger in not adopting it. And so I think you've got to get that that layer above to really understand what can be done with applying the technology, and also then getting out of the way. So bringing the people who really understand how to do that and allow them to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Rob. I mean, in many ways, AI, it's just a tool, or it can be just a tool. You need to understand how you use it. And then that's right. So let's hear a bit more from Sven on this topic of what's enabling for AI or what might be disabling.
I think great points have already been made, and that's I can add a lot. I think obviously, I think the memorable timeless words of Steve Jobs, you know, we hire smart people, not to that we tell them what to do, that so that they tell us what to do. I think that's absolutely key. You know, and this has been also a bit of luck of my trajectory. I've been, you know, supervising PhD students, undergrads, you know, throughout my academic life, and it just keeps you young, right? I don't think I'll ever be there where I think, oh, I actually know what's going on. It's always, you know, listening to people, and I think that's really important. It also keeps us, you know, active. But also, I think also to a certain extent, maybe this is another point, I don't know how much we've touched on that, is a certain humility that we learn at some point, that we are very clear we don't know that we are very aware of the things that we don't know. Getting that from young people is probably more of a challenge, but I think is also required, because the challenge they are going to grow into are so much bigger in a way than the ones that we have been facing, or we are taking on a lot more. So understanding that, you know, this also feeds the collaboration. I love what Rowan said, that you don't have to hire the people, you might partner with them, but that really means respecting the intelligence of the other. So you cannot go into a collaboration expecting that you know everything and the other partner does not. You know, I wouldn't expect anyone to do so, but I think it's important to make sure that this also gets transmitted, that in order to, you really have to listen. Otherwise, there's going to be no exchange. And then maybe circling back to the point that we started off with, which is, I think one of the most critical points for me is actually the ethics of this. And at what point do we listen to people completely out of the field and actually take their responses seriously? If we're doing an algorithm to, you know, for whatever topic, should we listen maybe to a cleric or a philosopher or a historian, right? That sounds maybe crazy, but maybe it isn't. We need to understand these viewpoints, that because, you know, people have been around each other for tens of thousands of years. We have learned a lot, even before AI, and now we're just putting all our knowledge into these decision-making systems, but from a very, very small point of view. And just case in point, I do follow, one area that I follow very actively on is natural language processing and the amazing advances that have been happened there. And then I hear neurologists saying, "Oh yeah, we knew this all along." You know, there's scientists who have been studying knowledge acquisition for decades who are not part of this culture, and that strikes me as strange. But of course, it's also not strange because, you know, communities learn from each other and they rarely reach out to other communities. I think this fostering of the interaction, this collaboration, I think is potentially one thing that we need to also infuse young people with.
Thank you very much, Sven. Perhaps in 2 or 3 more minutes, Rowan, what's your angle on what's enabling or disabling for adoption of AI in the coming years?
So I think, you know, what's enabling is kind of a more ethical access to data. So, you know, we have patients who trust certain organizations with their data for research purposes. That data shouldn't necessarily be easy to access, but nor should it be held hostage by institutions, you know, in pursuit of individual academic career goals. And I don't think we yet have a strong framework for that. So, you know, I've seen us, you know, in discussions for non-exclusive access to data. You know, we're not putting any rights on restrictions on how that data is used in the future. For diseases, you know, which have a very short prognosis post-disease, with discussions around patient data sets going on longer than patients have to live post-diagnosis. Now that can't be right. So that's one thing that I think we need to work on. I think that one of the rate limiting steps, frankly, is proof of value. You know, we're all very excited by the technology, but we've yet to really make the difference in showing that we can, change how we do innovation, make it more efficient, make it more capital efficient, and those hard business pieces beyond the technology. That will come, right? I know it will come. We've got smart people on this panel and out there working on it. But part of it, in terms of it really scaling at the next level, is showing that we can do more than bring a scale to the knowledge we already have, right? It's finding new things.
Yeah, I totally take your point on that. This thing needs to produce real value, doesn't it? So we need the proper use cases that actually deliver the real value. And the other point you made is well taken, the access to data and the quality of data. And because you can't have a situation where it's garbage in, garbage out. I mean, you need top quality data for everything, and you need open access, open data, arguably the freer the better, or at a lower price point, so people can get into these data sets at the best possible way to advance the science. I'd like to just check there's no further questions on the chat box. I needed to check there, but then I want to summarize a tiny bit. There's one other point I absolutely loved, which was Sven's point on having humility and listening to each other and listening to other domains and industries, and from neurologists to I guess the whole interdisciplinarity of the thing is just powerful, isn't it? So we need to have the humility to take the advice or take the views from other domain experts or other industry folks. That's very essential if we're wanting to design the best possible algorithms or the best possible ways of advancing any AI tool. And I mean, who knows? People talk, more sort of for the future. It's sort of general AI. If it gets more science fiction-like, that it sort of starts to take over the world. I hope it doesn't quite come to that. I would like to think that us humans were in control of these things, because we're designing the systems and building the things. And these tools and things should serve humanity in all the right ways. And we did start off the session earlier with our comments on the geopolitical tensions, which I don't think any one of us is happy about. And I just think we probably want to reflect further on that. Whatever we're doing here with how we're advancing our field in the life sciences and with us utilizing AI methods, I think it should be for the benefit and the good of humanity rather than anything else. And I would hope that pretty much every nation on this planet comes behind that sort of mission. And with that, I'd like to just thank our esteemed panelists. I thought there were some excellent points made. Thanks to the audience for listening and being here, and the questions you posed as well. If you have additional questions, I'm sure you can still stick them in the chat box. The session's recorded. I'm sure there's access afterwards. If there's any, I'd just like to thank the panelists, and I'd like to thank the audience. I also like to thank One Nucleus, of course, for the second day of the whole conference. It's been an excellent discussion just now. I hope you guys all agree. I've learned a lot actually from the various points that were made. So let's drive the whole thing further forward and shape the future. And it says building life science adventures. So I guess the whole thing is still an adventure. So let's make it a positive adventure going forward. Thanks to everyone, and bye-bye then.
Thank you. Thanks, Juergen. I'm just going to pop a link in the chat. So our Life Science Inspiration of the Year Award vote will close at midday. So if you haven't voted already, please make sure you go and vote. You'll notice that Rowan Gardner is one of our nominees, which is amazing. And just to echo what Juergen said, thank you so much for joining the session. I hope you enjoyed it and found it just as interesting and as valuable as what I did. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.